he is right now in a series of leadership meetings up on the Hill. As you can imagine, this potential bailout legislation has stirred things up a bit. We've already had one series of votes this morning and have another one pending. So we're very hopeful he will join us, but we're going to go ahead and get started without him this morning. In the meantime, I'll ask David Rivers from the Medical University of South Carolina, who is one of our longtime partners in this Braintrust effort, if he will open and moderate the panel. I've heard Clyburn say a number of times, he calls it a smorgasbord of energy alternatives that we need to look at: biofuels, wind, solar, hydrogen fuel cells, as well as the which about the CBC's environmental justice movement, about the CBC leadership in that movement. And again, that's at noon. It's right around the corner in 146C. The whip will be the special guest, and Representative Harold Mitchell from South Carolina and Regenesis, who's been on our panel before, will be the keynote speaker. So please join us right after this Braintrust for the lunch. So thank you all again for being here, and we're hopeful the whip will be here soon.
Thank you, Lindy. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this rainy morning in D.C. This is a Braintrust that Congressman Clyburn put together some time ago. As you know, in the past, we've had Braintrust on agricultural product from farm to fuel. We've had a Braintrust on hydrogen technology. In the past, we've worked with South Carolina State University, and we've had a Braintrust on the application of coal with Governor Schweitzer 2 years ago. And we had recently in Charleston, I think about a month ago, a national conference on the application of nuclear energy. And on October 22nd of this year, we'll be doing a live TV dialogue with John King as the moderator, also talking about the application of nuclear energy. If you've heard Congressman Clyburn said on many occasions, we need to develop a comprehensive energy policy. And that energy policy must look at all of our products. We must look at wind, solar, nuclear power. We must look at farm products. Anything we have in our arsenal, we must look at it in terms of developing a comprehensive energy policy. Also, you've heard him say that no matter what policy we pursue, we must look at and be concerned about the impact on the environment. We must be concerned about the impact on human health. We must be concerned about environmental justice issues, and we must look at affordability in terms of the development of a comprehensive nuclear national policy. So this dialogue, this Braintrust today, will simply look at and discuss the application of nuclear energy. As you know, in South Carolina, 50% of our utility, our electricity, comes from nuclear. And in the United States, we know for a fact that 20% comes from nuclear power. So this Braintrust now will just simply look at the application and talk about nuclear policy in that vein. With us today is a group of expert panelists who will come before you and make some presentation, and afterwards we'll have some discussion, question and answer. We have with us today Mr. Davis Matthews from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Robert Harris, formerly from PG&E in San Francisco, Deborah Klein, past president from American Public Health Association, Bishop Black is with us from Environmental Justice Center, and Patina Chisholm from Gulf Company, Southern Company. We'll have them come forward and make a presentation in that order. David?
I'm going to ask Tamika, could you activate my presentation slides? And while she does that, I'll begin my remarks. I'm David Matthews. I'm the director of the Division of New Reactor Licensing in the Office of New Reactors at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'll give her a minute here. Thank you so much. Okay, we're caught up. Anyway, I'm pleased to be invited to speak at this Environmental Justice Braintrust on the Nuclear Alternative, convened by the Honorable Senator Clyburn. Representative Clyburn. These remarks are going to be reminiscent of remarks I was given the opportunity to share in Charleston a few weeks ago, where I was joined by Lloyd Moore and Dave Rivers and Representative Clyburn. But I hope to focus them more particularly to the interests raised by the Braintrust activities and the announced purpose of these activities. I hope I'm going to be able to meet the objective of the annual legislative conference by educating everyone on pressing legislative and policy issues of critical concern to African Americans, by presenting information on the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission's process for licensing new reactors. And I will discuss the overall new reactor licensing process, but I will also include comments on when environmental justice issues are particularly considered in the course of our process. By way of a little background, the NRC's mission, for those of you who might not be familiar with it, we're an independent regulatory agency of the U.S. government, which means, in effect, that we're created by Congress for the express purpose of carrying out a legislative mandate. Although we owe a great allegiance at times because of budgetary considerations and other considerations to the White House, we are viewed as an independent regulatory agency, and as a result, we have independent authority from that you may have heard about that is exercised in regard to government facilities by the Department of Energy. Our principal focus is commercial nuclear activities in the United States relative to nuclear reactors and nuclear materials. A quick summary of the breadth of our responsibility is provided in this slide. To the point for today's discussion is the fact that there are 104 commercial nuclear power plants that are operating out there in the United States today, and they provide about 20% of the nation's electricity. As David suggested, there's quite a high proportion of electricity in South Carolina that's generated by nuclear activities. It's on the order of 50%. There are several other important activities involving nuclear materials that are listed on this slide, so it can give you an idea of the breadth of our responsibility. My particular area of concern, of course, is those reactors that are being proposed or planned by the nuclear industry for possible construction and operation in the United States to both sustain that 20% and hopefully advance it to a higher level to contribute to the nation's electricity energy needs. I want to give just a bit of history. This may be familiar to some of you, might not be familiar to several of you, but it's by way of demonstrating what I would argue is the perfect storm that occurred during the mid-1980s and into the 90s with regard to the nuclear industry. If you were to calculate the lapse time between the Nuclear Regulatory Commission granting a potential operator his construction permit and the time that we granted the operating license several years later, and you were to take those times and average them for all of the reactors that started operating before the 3 Mile Island accident, those reactors came online on an average of 5.6 years after they began construction. If you were to do that same calculation for all those reactors that came online and started operating and contributing to our nation's electricity needs after the 3 Mile Island accident, you see the calculation results in an average of 11.1 years. That is a significant increase in the amount of time it takes to conceive a project and get electrons on the grid. Obviously, that average was strongly weighted by some of those outliers on the right relative to activities that didn't come online for 20 or 23 years. But still, I think it's representative of a challenge. I might say that the TMI accident bullet, if I want to describe it that way, ricocheted throughout the industry and worldwide. The result is that no new plants in the United States have been ordered or constructed since 1978. And if you were to look at a listing of all those projects that were potentially canceled, not potentially, but actually canceled during that period, okay, from 1978, approximately 1978 on to this date, there were in effect 60 projects that were canceled. The number of units of nuclear reactor activity that those 60 projects represented almost, if they would have been installed and operated, equal the number of operating units today. So it's on the order of about 100 reactors in effect were canceled. Okay? So in many ways, this industry and this country, you know, for many, many reasons, sometimes alleged to be, you know, principally the fault of the NRC, we've suffered that criticism at times relative to the fact that we did enhance and increase our regulatory requirements after Three Mile Island. But there were many, many other factors that contributed to this delay and that downturn in reactors coming online. Many of them had to do with issues that we're struggling with today: availability of reasonable cost financing, construction delays, availability of political support at all levels, both national and local. As I said, one of the contributors was the regulatory process in the NRC. This Part 50 reference is to that part of the Code of Federal Regulations where our regulations are listed, so we just refer to it as the Part 50 licensing process. The process was a two-part process, and the essential features that you ought to take off of this graphic is that this was referred to, and as many times accurately referred to, as the design as you build approach. It was permitted by the regulatory process and had two distinct licensing steps, but without belaboring the details, basically people came to us and got permission to start building, and then several years later they tried to convince the NRC to let them operate whatever they ended up with. That was not a recipe for regulatory stability or for project success. Conditions of today are distinctly different from those mid-1980s. There is a strong energy demand growth at this point in time. Fossil fuels, as everybody knows, are no longer cheap. There are security concerns associated with the maintenance of our energy supply. Nuclear power, because of some activities of the NRC and the responsive industry, has improved the overall picture associated with overall life cycle costs and safety. The availability of those 104 reactors, and availability is a measure of, in effect, how much of the electricity they're capable of producing is generated on an average basis, is over 90%. Okay? Which means these reactors operate safely and reliably for a good portion of their licensing life. Okay? Pollution control and climate change is an issue. Obviously, that's one that has been brought to the forefront by virtue of issues surrounding global warming and greenhouse gas emissions. I mentioned the excellent operating experience and the amount of electricity that can be generated by some of the alternative forms, such as renewables and other demand-side efficiency improvements. A lot of those advantages have already been harvested, although nobody can give up on any of them because we need every bit of them, and that's the smorgasbord, I think, that David talked about. But I would suggest to you that nuclear power, because of the size of these plants, are probably the only alternative to meet what we see as large demand for baseload generating power, namely mechanisms for producing power in a large quantity for a lengthy period of time. Real quickly, I'll just mention that we are now embarked on another process that was embraced by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the early 1990s and only recently has begun to be utilized. It's called the Part 52 process. It, in effect, is a one-step licensing process, although there's some features near the end of the construction project that people would argue make it still a 1.1-step process. Basically, its principle is that we will issue, if the appropriate representations are made to us, we will issue one license to allow an operator to construct and operate that nuclear power plant, possibly as lengthy as 10 or 15 years after we issue that license, without coming back to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for approval. I'd now like to just take a minute and talk about what is it that the NRC really looks at and does as a part of these licensing approvals. We divide our reviews into two broad areas: environmental reviews and safety reviews. For each of the environmental impact statements that we generate for one of these projects, we have a team of about 20 people with a broad range of expertise that are reflected in this figure. You might note that that figure includes many issues that are germane to the discussions that are being held this week. You see one over on the left rephrased as socio-economic and environmental justice. That is an essential element of all our environmental reviews. We have a policy statement on environmental justice with regard to matters that relate to NRC regulatory and licensing actions. We're obligated under our regulations to assess the proposed action for significant impacts to the physical or human environment. Our focus on environmental justice reviews is on identifying and weighing what we refer to as disproportionately significant and adverse environmental impacts on minority and low-income populations that may be different from the impacts on the general population. I'd like, just by way of a visual aid, to give you an idea of what a final environmental impact statement looks like for one of these projects. And this is one to support what is referred to as an early site permit, where they come in and ask for permission to include the site in their lists of sites upon which they may build a nuclear power plant. And as you can see, it's a rather large tome. And an essential element of that is this analysis of socio-economic and environmental justice impacts. The other half of the equation is related to something that I think people more traditionally relate to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that's the safety review associated with the actual reactor design. And I've tried to depict in this graphic, centered by a graphic associated with the operation of a nuclear power plant, all the technical areas that are reviewed in the context of one of these safety reviews. We look at, in effect, seismology, meteorology, geology, hydrology. We look at the design of the plant. We look at the anticipated response to hypothetical accidents of the plant. Okay, we look at all the discharges potentially of the plant into the environment, and we importantly look at all the emergency planning that is in place and needs to be in place before one of these plants will be allowed to operate. When we complete our review of those safety issues, we prepare a safety evaluation report summarizing the anticipated effects of the proposed facility on public health and safety. And just by way of companion, I brought one of those along as well. Okay. And I would suggest to you, though, this is still a small subpart of the actual reviews we do, insofar as the fact that I'll show you in a minute that people can come in and get us to review their designs even though they haven't yet decided what site they're going to put this plant on. Here's the size of what I will call the resurgence or renaissance of nuclear power that is being represented to us at this point in time by the collective industry. Okay? At the moment, they have proposed to provide us applications for 34 new plants at 23 different locations around the United States. And they're going to centralize these or standardize these designs along 5 designs that have been offered for review. Just by way of update, so you get an idea of how fastly changing this environment is, I don't have my staff prepare a slide indicating how many applications we have under review right now, because it changes daily and I can't keep up with it. So the current snapshot is that we have 15 applications for combined licenses that we've received to date. One came in yesterday. 2 more will be received hopefully by the end of next week, and the remainder of the applications to equal that potential 34 plants at 23 sites are expected within the next 2 calendar years. Here's where they might be, provided they meet our licensing requirements and the projects go forward with regard to the requisite financing and local and other federal approvals. Okay? You notice there is a trend. The Southeast United States, okay, is a location where a lot of this activity is focused. That has to do with a lot of contributing factors. One is the need for power and the fact that our aging population is moving in that direction, so there is a demand for power. In addition, that area of the United States traditionally did not go down the road of deregulation. Namely, the electric utility industries in that area of the country are still traditional vertical integrated monopolies. Therefore, they are overseen by Public Utilities Commission, who can provide, in effect, rate recovery and cost recovery for these investments that would not normally be available to those who might be wanting to build a merchant plant in one of the deregulated states. So there is a trend associated with where these activities are located. As a result, the activity where we oversee the construction activities and the final review of process and procedures before operation, we focus that crew, if you want to put it that way, in Atlanta, Georgia, since that's where most of the activity is expected to occur. So I'll conclude and hand the podium over to the subsequent speakers by just saying we are preparing, as you can see, for an exceptionally high level of new reactor licensing activity. We expect, and at the moment we are funded to accomplish our mission to ensure adequate protection of public health and safety and the environment for new reactors, provided they use the new licensing process, 10 CFR Part 52. And I hope to have demonstrated to you that we do consider an integrated environmental justice matters through our evaluation under the National Environmental Policy Act. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions, or if you want to hold them until the end. Thank you very much.
Morning. Let me start with a disclaimer, since I am a former vice president of Pacific Gas and Electric Company in San Francisco, so the views I state are not necessarily reflective of PG&E. They are solely my views and may be quite different. I had the experience of living through a power plant, nuclear power plant in California, right in the middle of it. Pacific Gas and Electric Company in the late 60s got approval to site the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, estimated at $900 million. Finally came online in 1986, I believe. It could have been later, 87, at $6.8 billion. I don't think anybody quarrels with the notion that we need more electric power. That is absolutely the case. The chairman of the NRC has laid out, I think, a very compelling case that if we are to meet our energy needs of the future, we have to have a mix of power, and nuclear ought to be in that mix. And you can see from the number of applications that have been made that there is a resurgence of interest in such power. Matter of fact, even in California, where there is a moratorium, which has been there since 1976, the public is divided all of a sudden, 46-46 in favor of nuclear power, 46 against. The fundamental question continues to be one of whether or not politically and socially, especially environmental justice perspective, it is acceptable. And I think those are the issues that we have to come to grips with. I was at a panel yesterday with Carolyn Kilpatrick. Dr. Bullock was also on that panel. We almost ended up in a discussion on nuclear power. I persuaded them that wait until today. But I think today it gives us an opportunity to objectively and hopefully unemotionally, it's an emotional issue, I understand, but just look at the issue. There are some really hot button issues, as I alluded to a minute ago. The cost. Because of the new procedures, as the chairman has pointed out, some of the costs will be eliminated. The legal costs of the long proceedings, the challenges, etc. Hopefully through the new process, you avert some of those. But those are issues that are still there. The funding, Wall Street, who's going to, here in the United States, we don't, unlike in many other countries, the government does not fund these plants. You got to go out on the open market and get money for them. And of course, we know what the situation is today. And I pray that that situation changes very soon for my own sake. There are many health and
Don't we all?
there are many health and safety reasons that you will probably hear articulated in a moment. But it just seems to me, when we look at it from the fundamental issue of a community concern, we're looking at, and again, this is what caused the rift in California. What do you do with the nuclear waste? And that is the emotional issue that has really not fully been addressed, because we still don't have a place yet to permanently store that. Of course, when we do, then California's moratorium automatically goes away. But the people in California are very comfortable that they're safe for a while. Quote. I think as we move forward in this dialogue, it is important for all of us to really think from a perspective of how do we meet our energy needs, and how do we meet those needs in a responsible way so that safety is protected. And I can assure you that in terms of the Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant, PG&E's in California, it is operated very safely. And great precautions are taken to make certain it is operated. Regulation is just unbelievable. They won't let up for a moment. But the public has to be satisfied that that is happening. And as I see it, in the final analysis, the fundamental question that all of us, whether we are people who believe in nuclear power or don't believe in nuclear power, whether people who are avid environmental justice promoters or whatever, that we have to really sit and think, is this something we want to do? I'm not certain at all whether or not we can avert it when you look at the potential sources of power that's available to us. So it seems to me in the near term, for the next 30, 40 years, we are in fact going to have to give serious thought to this as a source of power. And then the question becomes, how do we collectively work together in concert to make certain that it's safe, that it's reliable, and that our communities, that is the minority communities, do not bear and a disproportionate impact. And finally, let me say, one way we can help assure that is that every corporation, Mr. Commissioner, who makes application to the NRC should have already established an environmental justice policy of that corporation. And if you would like to see an example of what one looks like, you can visit the PG&E website, pge.com, and see what has been adopted by that particular company in terms of its commitment to working with the community, not after you make your application, but long before you make that application. So with that, thank you very much.
Hi. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it was also a pleasure to be at the Charleston conference, where I did really learn a lot of updates around what was happening in the nuclear industry. I actually am here to kind of represent a whole set of professionals in public health. And basically, public health is the practice of social justice. I often use Martin Luther King's quote, which is going to be good for a long time: an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And basically, public health is also, though, an evidence-based approach. We use the best science we have, no matter what is the threat to human health, to make judgments about what should happen. Those are often very difficult because of different risk calculations. But I also wanted you to know that public health is just not about clinical services. A lot of times people think of public health that way. But when we think about the total health and well-being of Americans, Only 10% is due to the medical care system and how good that is. It's unfortunate because we spend $2 trillion on that. 20% to your genes, what you come to the world with, 20% the environment, and 50% behavior. So these kind of things really need to decisions made in concert with a whole range of folks in terms of that impact on life and public health. I would say at the conference, we were privileged to hear a whole lot of folks. We heard some investment bankers who talked about, and I love the way they said it, if you want my money, then you got to address my worries. I would say public health is really in the same place right now. If you really want that support, there's still some things that need to be addressed. So kind of I concur. There may be a little theme on this panel. It doesn't say negative. It doesn't say totally positive. We need to have some information and some answers before we can make decisions, I believe, or we believe, in terms of how this nuclear energy fits into the total picture. First and foremost, and this is America, but I hope this week is sobering and we may be learning that it's good sometimes to step back, have the big picture, rather than just letting some interests go ahead of other interests, etc. And I think energy policy is like that in this country. If we do not, as a nation, really say we need a comprehensive policy, and that includes everything. That includes incentives to people to change how they build their homes. I just had a friend build a zero energy home. And you know, they couldn't even buy the windows they needed for a Northeast home in America. They had to go to Canada. We haven't begun to look at the kinds of things we can do as individuals, from the kinds of cars we buy to how we live our house, etc., so that we could really address in a big way what we need, because we are huge consumers of energy. There's no question about that. And there's no question if we continued at this rate, the way we're doing stuff, we probably would need nuclear. But I'm not so convinced that we are going to have to do that if we do all the other things. In addition, there needs to be a huge infusion of technology and innovation into all kinds of industry from all kinds of options. Now, I understand the nuclear energy would like that too. That's fine also, because at the conference we heard a lot of interesting technical things about that I won't even go into here, but I maintain that a lot of the other industries haven't gotten that kind of infusion. We have a whole set of nuclear labs that continue to get resources and a lot of stuff. We need that same kind of investment across a lot of pieces, and that's probably controversial, but someone has to keep speaking up for the bigger picture. So I think we need that really good look. We also are concerned, and when you talk about this, we heard today about the environmental justice piece, which is key, and I'm going to come back to that for public health, but you also learned about the safety of the plant. We have to look at the entire life cycle of this nuclear energy. It starts with uranium mining, okay? The safety of that, how that happens, all the way down to the plant, and then again, the spent fuel. And we could talk a lot about that. There are lots of issues about how to get rid of that spent fuel. Again, that's a place where incredible technology could be there to help do that as well. But again, we would say we in public health don't have all the answers, the big pictures in terms of even what the need is, if we did everything else, to all the issues around safety, etc. Next, we would, in public health, also look at the big picture in terms of dollars. People talked at the conference about it was $6 to $8 billion per plant. Okay, we have 34 that have applied for new licenses. Maybe it's 50. So that's $350 billion. Then you've got to replace the ones that are that are been there for a while, go to a new technology. Hey, we're at $700 billion. Does that number sound familiar? No. That number is not only the number it's been take to get Wall Street off, it happens to be the number we spent on the entire defense budget, minus Iraq today, which is 3/4 of discretionary spending in this country. So again, I think we all, it doesn't matter where we live or what zip code or what income, we all have to get a big picture here. I mean, I actually believe public health does take government. Government has to be a partner, so I've always been supportive of an effective government role. But it also has to be people coming together to make decisions collectively in those areas. Frankly, I could see $8 billion if we were going to spend that. $8 billion to every state. There's a lot you can do again, on that whole energy plan, etc. So I guess we have got to have this dialogue at the right level where all of these things are brought in together. and with honest facts, etc. So if we are also going to go forward, again, I totally concur with what the former speaker said and what I know the speaker next to me is going to say, having heard him eloquently talk at the conference, is that we do need a community participation process. And I have to say, that really should be the hallmark of your public health department in every place. It's done a little differently, but that's what we're on the line to do all the time. So instead of setting up all these new processes, why aren't we all coming together? The DOE has their process, the NRC has their process, public health has their process. Let's have one ongoing process, ongoing all the time in the community. These very communities, unfortunately, where a lot of these power plants are some of the same communities that already have a lot of issues with environmental justice and already have some of the highest rates of disease, etc. And it's interesting. So some of that, I'm sure, may not be, it's hard to judge, but not due to nuclear power, but other things in that community. But we need to have an ongoing process, and I totally concur. It can't just start at a certain place and start and stop. And good environmental justice participation is not PR from companies. Okay, I'm just going to put that on the table. A lot of the stuff I've heard about often is more public relations. You need good public relations. You need companies invested. So I laud the PG&Es and those, and there were several others at the conference that I was very impressed with what they were doing, and it was sincere and genuine. But you also need that at a very grassroots level ongoing in your communities. And so I would say that is the kind of thing that public health can do and can contribute and should be doing. And if they're not, shame on them. We'll make sure that happens. I also would say if we're going to put these power plants or other things that have incredible risk, even though it's minute, but if that happened, the risk is huge, or what the consequences, then let's think about also what are some of the other paybacks in the community. Sure, jobs are one, but there's others. When we built the site at Tooele, Utah, which is where the big incinerator is for some of our chemical weapons outside of Salt Lake City, we built lots of roads and schools and a whole lot of other things for people. We did the same thing as a country in Umatilla, which is a reservation in northeast Oregon, where they have a site like that. So let's really think about what that kind of shared commitment would be and include that in the total cost as well as the total approach of how we're doing it. So I would just say to you again, as public health practitioners, we have a lot of questions. We'd like a lot of evidence. We would say, you know, we're not sure. We'd like to know all the other things before we go ahead and say, plow ahead on nuclear, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for nuclear as well. So thank you.